I decided to take a solo camping trip on the Appalachian Trail in Georgia, specifically near Blood Mountain. This spot wasn't just random. I'd always had a thing for the mountains, the way they seemed to stand timeless and unyielding. Life had been a mess lately, a breakup, a job I was barely holding on to, and the creeping feeling that I was just going through the motions. I needed this trip. It wasn't just about camping. It was about reclaiming some part of myself I'd lost in the chaos. I'd been planning this trip for months, obsessively checking gear lists and watching videos of hikers who'd braved these same paths. It wasn't just about being prepared. It was about creating an escape. When I finally stood at trailhead at Neal's Gap, the place I dreamed of reaching, I felt something I hadn't in years, a spark of hope. The day was picture-perfect crisp, with air so clear it felt like it could strip away the fog that had settled over my life. 10 miles later, after the kind of hiking that leaves your legs burning but your soul lighter, I found my campsite. It was a secluded clearing just off the trail, surrounded by towering pines and oaks that formed a natural canopy. It felt safe, cocooned in the wilderness. This wasn't just a campsite. It was the reset button I'd been desperate to hit. After pitching my tent and securing my food in a bear bag high above the ground, I spent the afternoon exploring. I walked down to a small creek I'd spotted earlier, the water icy cold as I filled my bottle. As dusk approached, I decided to go for an evening walk before settling in for the night. I grabbed my flashlight and knife, two essentials when you're deep in the woods, and followed a narrow trail that snaked through the forest. It was about 7 in the evening. I figured I'd walk a mile or so, clear my head, and make it back before full dark. I hadn't gone far when I noticed an SUV parked in a small clearing just off the trail. It struck me as odd. Vehicles weren't allowed this deep into the forest unless you had special permits, and even then, they'd be used for maintenance or emergencies. Curiosity got the better of me, and I approached cautiously, wondering what someone could be doing out here with a car. That's when I heard it. A low, menacing growl that sent every hair on my body standing on end. Before I could process the sound, a dog emerged from behind the SUV. It was massive, its fur bristling like a wild animal and its teeth bared in a snarl. "Hey, who?" I called out, taking a step back, my heart hammering in my chest. The dog didn't hesitate. It lunged at me so suddenly that I didn't even have time to process what was happening. Teeth sank into my forearm, sharp and unrelenting, and pain exploded through me like a wildfire. It was so quick, so unexpected, that my mind froze, unable to decide what to do. I stumbled back instinctively, trying to shake the beast off, but it wouldn't let go. Blood started to drip down my arm, warm and sticky, as panic overtook me. Instinct kicked in. I fumbled for the knife in my pocket, yanking it out and flipping it open. My hands shook as I waved it in front of me, shouting at the dog to back off. "Get away! Get the hell back!" I screamed. The dog hesitated for a moment, snarling but keeping its distance, as if sizing me up. That's when I saw them. A man and a woman standing beside the SUV, watching the whole thing unfold. They didn't move, didn't shout for the dog or come to my aid. They just stood there, their faces blank, almost creepy vibe. The woman had her arms crossed, and the man leaned against the hood of the vehicle as if he were watching a casual game of fetch. "Call your dog off!" I yelled, my voice raw with panic and anger. Nothing. No reaction. The man shrugged, a slow, lazy movement that sent a chill down my spine. The woman didn't even blink. I took a step back, my knife still out, blood dripping onto the forest floor. The dog growled again. It didn't advance this time. I kept the blade between us, moving slowly away from the SUV. My eyes darted between the dog and the couple, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. Finally, the dog backed off, its growls fading as it retreated toward the vehicle. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I turned and walked quickly back down the trail, my injured arm clutched to my chest. I wanted to run, but I didn't dare. The couple's eerie indifference felt more dangerous than the dog's teeth. When I made it back to my campsite, the adrenaline began to wear off, and the pain in my arm became unbearable. I dug through my first aid kit, cleaning the wound as best as I could with antiseptic wipes and wrapping it tightly in gauze. It wasn't deep enough to require stitches, but it was bad enough to make me worry about infection. The forest around me felt different now. I kept my knife close, scanning the trees for any sign of movement. The couple's faces wouldn't leave my mind. Their cold, detached expressions, the way they just stood there. Back at my camp, I was shaking uncontrollably. My arm throbbed with pain as I tore open the first aid kit I'd packed. Cleaning the wound made me wince, but it needed to be done. I couldn't risk an infection out here. I spent the entire night wide awake. By morning, I packed up my campsite in quickly. The plan had been to stay for a few more days, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. As I hiked back toward Neil's Gap, I kept looking over to see the couple or the dog trailing me. That day taught me something I wouldn't forget. From then on, I made a vow to avoid isolated spots, especially ones that set my instincts on edge. Some places, no matter how beautiful, weren't worth the risk. As I left the hospital and drove home, one thought kept circling in my mind. Not every day in the mountains is a good one. This happened to us back in the summer of 2012. My girlfriend, Odessa, and I decided to hit the Appalachian Mountains for a camping trip. We'd been tossing the idea around for weeks, sick of the same old city grind. Life felt like a damn hamster wheel, deadlines piling up, the noise never stopping. Odessa, always the dreamer with her paints and notebooks, wanted to find inspiration out there in the wild. Me? I needed to get my head straight. The city had turned into a pressure cooker, and I was ready to blow. So, yeah, we thought the mountains would be our perfect escape. We picked a spot deep in the Chattahoochee National Forest, way off the beaten path, about 15 miles from the nearest town. Odessa found it online and fell in love with the idea of being surrounded by towering pines and oaks. I wasn't about to argue, she was so excited, and honestly, I was ready to go anywhere that wasn't a concrete jungle. The promise of nights under a sky full of stars and mornings, with nothing but the sound of birds, sounded like the reset we both needed. The drive up was brutal, 3 hours of winding mountain roads that seemed to go on forever. By the time we hit the trailhead, it was late afternoon, the sun already sinking low. We parked the car, grabbed our gear, and hiked 3 miles to this secluded little clearing Odessa had picked. It was perfect, just enough space for our tent and a small fire pit. Setting up camp didn't take long, and soon we were sitting by the fire, roasting marshmallows like a couple of kids. For a while, it felt like we'd left all our problems behind. The next morning, we were up with the sun. A quick breakfast and campfire coffee, and we were ready to explore. We took a trail that cut deeper into the forest, climbing higher with every step. We must have covered 8 miles before we dragged ourselves back to camp, legs aching but spirits high. After dinner, we settled by the fire again, talking about everything under the stars, our dreams, our plans, all the places we wanted to see. It felt good, like we were finally reconnecting after weeks of being too caught up in our own crap. By the time we crawled into the tent, it was past 10 p.m., and the forest was pitch black except for the faint glow of our dying fire. That peace didn't last. Around midnight, I woke up to this weird rustling noise outside the tent. I thought it was just some raccoon digging through our stuff, but the sound got louder, heavier, like someone or something was moving around out there. Odessa woke up too, her eyes wide in the dim light. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded. My gut was telling me something wasn't right. I unzipped the tent just enough to peek out, shining the light toward the noise. My stomach dropped. We heard the sound of a truck coming. It was getting closer, and then we saw it. A truck creeping down the trail, headlights off, moving like it didn't want to be noticed. The truck stopped about 30 feet from our tent. My heart was pounding. We just sat there, frozen, watching as the truck sat idle in the dark. After about 15 minutes, it backed up and disappeared into the woods. We exhaled, trying to convince ourselves it was just some lost hiker. But deep down, we knew better. Not even 10 minutes later, the truck came back. This time, it parked in the exact same spot. A bright flashlight clicked on, scanning our car and campsite. My blood ran cold. Whoever was in that truck wasn't lost. They were watching us. "We need to get the hell out of here," Odessa whispered, her voice shaking. I nodded, grabbing my knife and car keys. We packed up what we could in seconds, moving as quietly as possible. The flashlight beam swept dangerously close to us as we crept toward the car, and I held my breath, praying we wouldn't get spotted. Once we were in the car, we locked the doors and sat there, gripping each other's hands so tightly it hurt. The truck didn't move. It just sat there, its headlights still off, the flashlight cutting through the dark. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, ready to floor it at the first sign of trouble. Minutes dragged on like hours, but finally, the truck's engine started and it drove off. We waited another 20 minutes, too scared to move, before I started the car and sped down the trail, kicking up dirt as we tore out of there. By the time we hit the main road, the sun was coming up. We didn't stop until we reached the nearest town. Sitting in that booth, sipping coffee, and staring at each other in disbelief, it finally hit us how close we'd come to, well, who the hell knows what. The truck, the shadow, the flashlight. We never found out who was in that truck or what they wanted. But one thing's for damn sure, we don't do isolated campsites anymore. It was a Saturday morning, the kind where the Appalachian air feels thick with dew and the promise of a hot day ahead. I had packed up the kids, Timmy and Sophie, early enough to avoid the midday sun. Our plan was simple: scout out this remote trail in the heart of the Blue Ridge section of the Appalachian Mountains. It wasn't one of those well-maintained, tourist-heavy paths. It was rugged, wild, and far from the main drag. Perfect for a little adventure. We parked the old SUV at the edge of a dirt pull-off. There wasn't another car in sight, just the dense woods stretching endlessly in every direction. The trailhead wasn't marked by much, just an old weathered post with some faded lettering that I couldn't make out. I glanced at my watch, 8:47 a.m. Plenty of time to explore before heading back for lunch. The first half hour on the trail was uneventful. The kids scampered ahead, their voices echoing in the quiet forest. Timmy was poking at fallen logs with a stick, declaring himself the explorer king, while Sophie picked wildflowers and stuffed them into her little backpack. The trail was narrow, winding through thick groves of pine and hardwoods. Every so often, a bird call or the rustle of a squirrel reminded me we weren't completely alone in the woods. We didn't go far, maybe a mile in, before the terrain got sketchy, steeper inclines, loose rocks, and thick roots that snaked across the path like booby traps. Sophie tripped on one and skinned her knee, which led to a mini meltdown. That's when I decided we'd seen enough. "All right, adventurers, we're heading back," I announced, trying to sound upbeat. Timmy grumbled, but Sophie clung to my hand, sniffling and muttering about her boo-boo. The walk back felt different, quieter. I chalked it up to my own paranoia. I'd heard too many stories about these mountains, the kind that crawl under your skin and make you second-guess the snap of a twig or the way shadows shift. Still, I told myself it was just my imagination. We were maybe 10 minutes from the parking lot when I spotted him. At first, he was just a shape, a dark smudge moving between the trees about 50 yards off the trail. I stopped dead in my tracks, pulling Sophie to my side. "Timmy, hold up," I hissed, my voice sharper than I intended. "What?" he asked, turning around. Quiet, I said, motioning for him to stay close. The figure came into focus as he stepped into a patch of dappled sunlight. A man, tall and lanky, wearing a faded green jacket and jeans that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. His face was dark with yellow, long, creepy teeth, almost gaunt, and his hair hung in greasy strands. What struck me most was his stillness. He wasn't walking or hiking. He was just standing there, half hidden behind a tree, watching us. My first thought was, what the hell is this guy doing out here? There were no campsites nearby, no picnic areas, no reason for anyone to be lurking off the trail like that. I forced a smile and called out. The man didn't respond, didn't move, just kept staring. My gut was screaming at me to get the kids out of there, but I didn't want to scare them. All right, guys, let's keep moving, I said, trying to sound casual. I herded them ahead of me, keeping myself between them and the man. As we walked, I kept glancing over. The man hadn't moved, but I could feel his eyes on us, burning into my back like a brand. The last stretch of the trail felt like it took heavy. I kept imagining him stepping out of the trees behind us, or worse, cutting us off at the parking lot. When we finally broke through the tree line and saw the car, I almost collapsed with relief. I hurried the kids into the back seat, locking the doors the second they were inside. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with the keys, and it took me 2 tries to get the engine started. As I backed out of the lot, the man was standing at the edge of the trail, just visible between the trees. He was watching us, his head tilted slightly, like he was trying to memorize our faces. We didn't stop driving until we hit a gas station 20 miles down the road. I got the kids some snacks and tried to shake off the encounter, but it stuck with me. Who was that guy? What was he doing out there? And why did he look at us like that? At night, after the kids were asleep, I did some digging online. The trail we'd been on wasn't well known, but it had a history. Stories of strange sightings, people going missing, and one particularly gruesome tale about a hiker who'd been found years later, his body half buried in a shallow grave not far from the trailhead. I don't know what that man's intentions were, and honestly, I don't want to know. All I know is that I won't be taking my kids back to the woods again. Three years ago, on a miserable, rainy evening, I decided to take a walk along a trail near my small town in Pennsylvania. It wasn't just any trail. This one cut through dense woods near Pine Creek Gorge, about 20 miles from where I lived. People called it the Grand Canyon of Pennsylvania, but for me, it was my escape. Life had been hitting me hard back then, a breakup that gutted me, and a suffocating sense of being stuck. Walking that trail in the rain usually helped me sort through the mess in my head. But that evening was different. The rain came down in sheets as I pulled into the empty parking lot near the trailhead. The lot was a patchy gravel mess, more pothole than road. My old sneakers squelched as I stepped out of the car, already soaked to the bone. I yanked up my hood and shoved my hands into my jacket pockets, muttering under my breath, "Damn rain. Damn everything." That's when I saw it. An old, rusted pickup truck sitting near the far edge of the lot, the kind that looked like it had been dragged out of a junkyard. My first instinct was to ignore it. People came and went around here all the time. But as I glanced up, I noticed a man sitting inside. He wasn't fiddling with his phone or digging for something in the glove box, like most people would be. No, he was staring at me, directly at me. His eyes locked onto mine with this unsettling intensity, like he'd been waiting for me to show up. What the hell? I quickly looked away, pretending I hadn't noticed him. But it was too late. The unease had already wormed its way into my gut. Something about him felt off. Don't be paranoid, I told myself, stepping onto the trail. I glanced over my shoulder one more time, and there he was, still watching me. Jesus. I quickened my pace, my sneakers slipping on the wet gravel. The trail itself was a familiar one. It twisted through dense woods, crossed a small creek, and looped around back to the lot about 2 miles later. Normally, I'd take my time, listening to the sound of rain hitting the leaves and letting the quietness of the forest calm me. But not that night. That night, every step felt like a mistake. About 10 minutes in, I glanced back again. Nothing. No sign of the truck or the man. My shoulders relaxed a fraction, but my instincts wouldn't let me shake the feeling. Something wasn't right. That's when I caught it movement in my peripheral vision. A shadow, low and quick, weaving between the trees. My breath hitched. "Hell, no," I whisper, my heart pounding so hard it echoed in my ears. I picked up my pace, the rain doing little to hide the sound of my footsteps splashing through puddles. Then I heard it, the faint crunch of gravel. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to know. Fast forward 5 minutes, and I was practically jogging, cursing under my breath. Damn it, why did I come out here alone? I reached a fork in the trail and made a split-second decision. To the left was the main loop that led back to the parking lot. To the right was a barely visible, overgrown path that hadn't been maintained in years. It crossed an old wooden bridge that was half rotted and then disappeared into the woods. I'd only taken it once before, and even then, it had felt like a bad idea. But now it felt like my best shot at losing whoever might be behind me. I veered right, practically diving into the thicket. The rain had turned the trail into a slippery mess, and branches clawed at my jacket as I pushed through. When I reached the bridge, I paused just long enough to glance back. And there he was, the man from the truck, standing at the edge of the main trail, partially hidden behind a tree. My stomach dropped. He wasn't just walking, he was stalking, and he wasn't empty-handed. In one hand, he held a plastic bag. "Oh my God," I whispered, my voice shaking. "This can't be real." My brain screamed at me to move, but my legs felt like lead. He hadn't spotted me yet, but it was only a matter of time. Taking a deep breath, I carefully slipped across the bridge, the rotting planks groaning under my weight. One wrong move, and I'd be on my worst, vulnerable and exposed. Once I was across, I ducked behind a cluster of bushes and crouched low, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Peeking through the leaves, I watched as the man stepped onto the overgrown path. He was coming. "Hell no," I muttered, adrenaline surging through me. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I bolted, crashing through the underbrush, not caring about the cuts and scrapes that the branches left on my arms. The trail looped back around to the parking lot eventually, but it would take me at least another mile to get there. My mind raced as I tried to think of a plan. What could I use as a weapon? My phone was useless out here. No signal, of course. The only thing I had was a small pocket knife buried somewhere in my jacket. The sound of heavy footsteps behind me sent a jolt of panic through my chest. He was faster than I thought. Come on, I muttered, forcing my legs to move faster. The rain made everything harder. My shoes slipped on the muddy trail, and my lungs burned as I struggled to keep my pace. Finally, I saw parking lot lights through the trees. But he was close. Too close. "Oh, God! Please," I begged, my voice cracking. Bursting into the parking lot, I didn't stop running until I reached my car. The man had stopped at the edge of the lot, his figure barely visible in the rain. He stood there, staring at me the same way he had from his truck. I dove into the car, locking the doors and jamming the key into the ignition. It wasn't until I was halfway home that I allowed myself to breathe. Later, I found out who he was. The news reported that a man matching his description had been involved in a string of abductions and murders in the area. He was killed in a police standoff not long after that night. I haven't walked alone since. Now, I carry a concealed weapon and always have my dog with me. I was 16 when this happened, and it still haunts me still. My friends and I had planned a weekend camping trip near a secluded forest just outside Silverton, Colorado, not far from the San Juan National Forest. The idea was to escape the mundane life of high school, hang out by the campfire, and just be teenagers. We had chosen a spot about 3 miles from the interstate, deep enough into the woods to feel wild but close enough to civilization for comfort. At least, that's what I told myself. The first day was a blur of laughter, setting up tents and making s'mores. By the second evening, the campsite was alive with the sound of crackling fires. I remember feeling a mix of excitement and nervous energy. My boyfriend, Kyle, was staying at another site about a half-mile away with a few of his friends. We had been texting on and off, and around 9 p.m. I decided to walk over and surprise him. "You're seriously walking there alone?" my friend, Jess asked. "It's not that far," I reply, trying to sound braver than I felt. "I've got my flashlight. I'll be fine." Looking back, I wish I had listened to her. Hell, I wish I had stayed put. The trail between our campsites was narrow, lined with towering pines that seemed to close in around me as I walked. The moonlight barely filtered through, and my cheap flashlight barely cut through the darkness. Damn, why did it have to be so quiet? Even the crickets seemed to have taken the night off. As I reached the gravel road that bordered the campground, a pair of headlights suddenly cut through the darkness, blinding me for a moment. "Oh, God," I muttered under my breath, shielding my eyes. A small, beat-up Volkswagen Beetle rolled to a stop a few feet from me. The driver, a man who looked to be in his late 50s, leaned out the window, flashing a smile that was just a little too friendly. "Hey there," he said. "You shouldn't be walking out here alone at night. It's dangerous. Let me give you a ride to wherever you're headed." My gut clenched. His dark hair was neatly combed, his clothes casual but tidy. On the surface, he looked harmless, but there was something off. I couldn't put my finger on it. "Thank you, but I'm okay. It's not far," I reply, forcing a polite smile and taking a step back from the car. My flashlight wobbled in my hand as I tried to steady my nerves. His smile faltered for just a second before he recovered. "Come on," he said, his tone a little sharper. "I'm just trying to help. You never know who might be out here. It's safer in the car." "Oh, hell no," I thought to myself. The way he said it, the edge in his voice, the way his eyes locked onto mine made my skin crawl. I forced a firmer tone into my voice. "No, thank you. I'll be fine." His eyes lingered on me, cold and calculating, as if he were sizing me up. Then, with a shrug and a chillingly calm, "Suit yourself," he spit out of the window. Then he rolled up the window and drove off, his taillights disappearing into the night. I stood there for a moment, my heart hammering in my chest. "What the hell was that?" I whispered to myself. Shaking it off, I hurried along the trail, glancing over every few steps to make sure he wasn't circling back. The forest felt darker, more oppressive. When I finally reached Kyle's campsite, I burst into the clearing, out of breath and visibly shaken. "What happened?" Kyle asked, his brow furrowing with concern. I recounted the encounter, trying to downplay my fear, but failing miserably. "It was probably nothing," I said, though the words felt hollow. "Just some creepy old guy being weird." Kyle's jaw tightened. "You shouldn't have been walking alone. Next time, text me, and I'll come get you." I nodded, grateful for his concern but eager to forget the whole thing. We spent the rest of the night by the fire, but the unease lingered like a shadow at the edge of my mind. Fast forward a few years. I was sitting on the couch, flipping through channels, when I landed on a true crime documentary. The story was about a serial killer who had terrorized the area, luring women into his car with a friendly demeanor before revealing his true intentions. My stomach dropped as they showed his mugshot. It was him. The man in the Volkswagen Beetle. The same neat hair, the same unsettling smile. "Oh, my God," I whispered, my hands trembling. Memories of that night came flooding back the headlights. The fake kindness, the way he looked at me like I was prey. I was just close to becoming one of his victims made me feel sick. I've never walked alone at night since that day. Hell, I won't even go camping without a group. I always carry pepper spray and a knife now.